there. My name is Sharon A, and I am a professor of Buddhism at Seattle University. And I first want to say thank you to Francis Garrett for organizing and putting together these wonderful videos inspired by Sarah Ahmed's Complaint Collective. And I have been a professor of Buddhism for over 21 years at the same institution. And so I thought I would share with you some of the, I would say, inspiring things I've learned from Sarah Ahmed's work, and really looking forward actually to her book coming out on complaint. And I thought I would actually start with the story of a complaint. And I'm a full professor, and I recognize that being a full professor comes with certain privileges. And so my ability to lodge a complaint really came from my ability to lodge a complaint, because I have a certain security in my institution. But let me share this story and this complaint, because the complaint had everything to do with race, racialization, and my experiences of hyper-invisibility and marginalization in the academic institution. So I'll start with what happened most recently, and then I'll work back in time to give a little bit of insight from my graduate school years, and maybe shed some light on experiences that might resonate with you as well. So the story of my complaint. I applied for a 2-year endowed fellowship in Seattle University, and the position is for the Wismer Professor of Gender and Sexuality Studies. And so an application announcement was sent out probably about 3 weeks before the application was due. And 3 weeks is not a lot of turnaround time given the kinds of things that they were asking for. But I have wanted this endowed professorship since I came to Seattle University. And to be honest, I have applied a few times and I got rejected. And so I thought, okay, I'll apply again. And so I put my life on hold so that I could put together the best application that I could. And I was really happy with it. And I sent it around to a couple of friends, and I got great feedback. And so I submitted my application, and I actually submitted it a week early because I was just kind of excited about it. And so I was waiting until the deadline, which was June 4th, and I thought I would just wait and see what happened, and I felt pretty good about my possibilities. So on June 4th, rather than hearing anything from the search committee, instead, I read in my email this blanket email announcement to the entire university saying, oh, guess what? We have extended the deadline. Anybody can apply to the professorship because the deadline has been moved. And nobody bothered to contact me. So here's why this was so infuriating. It was incredibly infuriating, number one, because I had already submitted an application. And when you submit an application and a deadline closes, you presume that you don't open the deadline unless nobody applied. And unless that person or the people who applied were rejected, then you start the search all over again. However, that did not happen. And I was really angry about it because I have been on committees where we have been searching for another endowed professorship. I've held other professorships in my university, and the one thing I always did was to make sure that we didn't extend deadlines arbitrarily. Most of our lives do not function according to deadlines we choose to extend just because we feel like it. Same exact situation that came up when I was on a committee and my dean wanted to extend a deadline after the deadline had passed and we had already received applications, and I refused him. And I said no, precisely because it was unfair and it was unjust. And rather than try to open and extend a deadline to get more people that you'd prefer to have this professorship, instead, what we should do is vote. And then if we reject all the candidates, then open the search again. That to me is how things should run. However, that is not always how things run. So right after I heard this announcement that the deadline was extended, I sat back and I was honestly incredibly infuriated, because it was as if my application did not count. It was as if I never submitted anything. And considering that we had just finished a summit on racial equity, and mind you, there were very few Asian Americans included in this racial equity summit, I was infuriated precisely because, as an Asian American woman in the academy, I submitted an application and it was as if I never did. And so I was furious. And then, as soon as I registered my anger with a few of my friends who had actually contacted me first to say WTF, I received another email from the committee saying, "Oh, Sharon, yes, you did submit an application, and we'd like to invite you and give you the opportunity to add to your application if you'd like." And I was incredibly upset and angry by this, precisely because, first of all, it was as if I never actually applied. And so they extended the deadline. Secondly, to then follow up and email me and say, "Oh, by the way, we want to extend you this courtesy of adding or changing, doing anything to your application." That was it for me. That was the final the final impetus to actually do something about this instead of just rage on my own at home. And so I registered a complaint. I contacted not the committee, because I knew that if I complained to the committee, they still have power over my application. And so if I complained to the committee, then they would probably find ways to find all the reasons why my application wouldn't merit this professorship. And so I didn't want to take that chance. So I contacted my provost of my university, and I sent a very strong email of why I was upset about this and my complaint of the unjust nature of it, and the fact that Asian Americans are always rendered invisible in the institution. And this was a clear-cut example of that. And so I gave basically a short Asian American history lesson to my provost, and much to his credit, he called me right away, and he did a little sleuthing for me and found out that the deadline was extended because a few people had contacted the committee saying that, oh, they wished that they had had the time to apply, but they didn't. And so then the committee decided that they were going to extend the deadline. Now, to me, that reads as the committee members' friends didn't get their stuff done on time and they really wanted a chance. And so this whole process led me to register this complaint precisely because the trust was lost, right? When something like this happens, it's really hard to know who it was that decided that they wanted to contact the committee and change the rules. Now, I'm not a stickler for rules per se, but when it comes to things like this, in order to protect the people who are part of the process, then you really should stick to whatever deadline was set. And so I registered this complaint with my provost. He listened, and while the outcome is still unsatisfying, and by the way, I have no idea what they're going to vote. The outcome is unsatisfying, and yet I feel a little bit satisfied for having registered the complaint. So the reason why the outcome is unsatisfying is because no matter what I say, no matter what the provost says prior to the vote, it's going to come back and hurt me. So if I say something, then my application will probably be considered not good enough. If the provost says anything, then my application will probably be considered not good enough. And so, I begin with this short video with this complaint because it is very possible that I could have said nothing, but there was a lot of harm that was done. And the harm that was done was, number one, again, the invisibilization of my candidacy for this position. Like, I did nothing. I didn't take the time. I didn't spend all these hours preparing for this. My preference would have been to go ahead and convene the committee, the search committee, and read our files, read our applications, and then vote, and then reject me, right? Because it would have been a cleaner process. But instead, what ended up happening was that I somehow was not considered important enough to actually contact ahead of time to even suggest that this might be a possibility. And by contacting me later and saying, oh, by the way, we'd like to extend you this courtesy, it was just plain insulting, right? So I registered a complaint because it needed to happen. And when you do register a complaint, there will be fallback, there will be kickback, and I'm curious to see what it will be. But for me, I didn't feel that I could process all of this anger without doing something about it. Now, this hasn't always been a possibility for me, and many of you are in graduate school, or maybe you are in the early years of your teaching positions, and these kinds of complaints are not easily made. And so it takes a certain level of security and privilege in the institution, which I have as a full professor. But the other reason why I lodged this complaint was because I know it's going to happen again. And it might not affect me, but it will affect other people who may not have the ability to lodge a complaint. And so as for the complaint collective that is part of this, or is the umbrella to this video series, I am so grateful, because when I think back of my own career and my own slogging through graduate school, I wish that I had had the resources that this collective is delivering. So let me just share a few things, a few items in my complaint list. So I received my Ph.D. in Buddhist Studies from Harvard University. And I remember wanting desperately to study Buddhism and gender. And I entered into my doctoral program. We had a brand new professor of Tibetan studies and Tibetan Buddhism. And so when I met with him and expressed my interest in doing work on Tibetan Buddhism and gender, the words out of his mouth were, "Gender? What gender in Buddhism?" And it was an absolutely startling moment in time where I realized that he just completely ignored and dismissed the relevance of studying Buddhism and gender. Now, granted, this was quite a while ago, over 2 decades ago, and yet it reflects so much of the power that our mentors and our advisors have over us in the graduate school years. And so I actually didn't really study Tibetan Buddhism and gender at all. I studied everything that he wanted me to study. And in the end, it was incredibly unsatisfying. And so I ended up pivoting. But before I pivoted, and I always suggest a pivot, a skillful pivot, when what you're studying does not bring joy or satisfaction or even more curiosity. Before that happened, I continued to work under whatever it was that he wanted me to do, which I honestly didn't really understand anyway, but I did it. There was a point in time, a few years after, about 2 years later, I had fallen in love. I had gotten engaged. I came into my classroom with engagement ring on my finger, but I said nothing because I didn't want to share any of my personal life because I thought it would be held against me. And it actually was, because my advisor was the first person who noticed that I had an engagement ring on my finger. And the first words out of his mouth were, "Oh, congratulations, you're getting married. I guess that's it then." Yeah, I guess that's it then. So there was an assumption somehow that I would no longer be a viable candidate in Buddhist studies. That might be one possibility of what he was thinking. Number two, I don't know if he thought that suddenly I was going to be married and therefore not available as an adoring graduate student. Either way, it was incredibly dismissive, and um, it had some later ramifications for me as well. A few years later, I was at the American Academy of Religion, and I remember going down a set of escalators, and there were a few grad students from other universities that I had met here and there. We weren't particularly close, but I just remember one of them saying to me, "Oh, you're still here? I didn't know you were still in academia anymore." In other words, the story got out that I had gotten engaged, and the story got out that somehow I was no longer in academics because I was going to be married. Now, this is the kind of nonsense that happened back then, but I imagine these people are still around today, so this kind of nonsense is still happening. So that is one of the many things that happened with just this one advisor. Interestingly, with this advisor, the female graduate students, as well as the other graduate students of color, were not on a one-to-one name basis with our advisor, unlike our white male colleagues who were able to call this professor by his first name. When I tried to do that, I was actually reprimanded and told to refer to him as professor. So again, many stories of nonsense, dismissal, outright sexism, you name it, it happened. Now, the other thing that took place for many of us in our Buddhist Studies program was that basically, because we were Asian and Asian American students, many of us were, a lot of the work that we wanted to do that that really highlighted Asian and Asian American forms of Buddhist practice, these were completely dismissed as less worthy topics of scholarship, precisely because we were focusing on Asians and Asian Americans, and for a lot of the time, lay Buddhists. And at that particular point in time, Asian and Asian American Buddhists were not considered to be a legitimate source of study. And I would say it's still happening today. So graduate school was all sorts of dismissals that I had to navigate my way through. After I decided that I was going to switch my field, I actually ended up leaving Buddhist studies, Tibetan Buddhist studies, although officially it came from my advisor breaking up with me through a letter. I received a letter from my then advisor basically telling me that I was no longer going to be working with him because I don't remember what, I wish I had saved the letter. It was over 20 years ago, but because somehow I wasn't in touch enough with my advisor, I wasn't emailing him enough, or I don't even remember what it was. But in any case, he sent me a letter and told me I was no longer working with him, which was fine. I had moved on from Tibetan Buddhist studies anyway. At this point in time, I was living in Los Angeles. I had moved to LA actually, and started doing work with a Korean Buddhist temple. And so I ended up with another advisor. And this advisor was someone I had known all through my graduate studies and was really pleased to have him as my advisor. However, when he learned that I was going to be focusing on Asian American religion, Asian American Buddhism, and race, he simply stopped responding to my calls, to my emails, and I honestly, to this day, have no idea what happened. I guess in today's terms, I would just say he ghosted me, just stopped absolutely responding whatsoever. And so after about 6 months of trying to get him to contact me, I ended up getting in touch with the head of the department and got another advisor. And this advisor turned out to be a wonderful resource. And she guided me through my dissertation and found an incredible committee for me of other female faculty across the university. And their main goal was to support me as I finished my dissertation. And I share this story because it's reflective again of the ways in which many of us are easily cast off. We're often cast off as well if we choose to do something different. Neither of the first two advisors seemed to think there was any value in studying Asian American religion and Buddhism, gender, and race. And yet the third advisor did. And so my suggestion here for those of you who are finding that your advisors are not finding your work valuable, look somewhere else, right? Trust your gut. It's always important for us to remember that we know things and we have insight about things. And just because someone's your advisor doesn't mean they know everything. And so it's really beneficial to reach out and to find other people that might be able to support you better. My move towards Asian American religions and Buddhism also found a lot of support through networks outside of my university. And so if you are studying a topic that doesn't have a lot of experts in your department, it just means that you have to look elsewhere and invite other people onto your committees, reach out to other people doing similar work, and find other mentors outside of your department because they will see the value of what you're doing, right? It's very hard for someone who's never bothered to ask the same questions that you've asked. It's very hard for them to see the point, right? So I guarantee you there will be others that find your work incredibly valuable and great contributions to the field. Now, over the course of time, I would say that I developed far more of my own research agenda. So there are some benefits, I would say, of being rejected by your advisors, although I wish it had happened another way. I've been able to forge my own path, which has always been interdisciplinary and intersectional. And it really meant learning to rely on myself and trust myself in terms of what I did and in terms of the areas of contribution that really I wanted to develop for myself. Now, it doesn't mean I was alone the whole time, and this is where I want to share a little bit of insight into what might be beneficial. And I'm going to share some bits of Sarah Ahmed's Living a Feminist Life. This book has just been this incredible resource for me, especially Ahmed's discovery of, not discovery, but really the naming of the feminist Killjoy, right? And so this is a kind of identity in her persona that she writes about in terms of living a feminist life. And so what I wanted to share was part of her conclusion called a Killjoy survival kit. And these are the tools in her feminist toolbox to survive the everyday assaults on our well-being. And I've really drawn upon this quite a bit. I've written about it, but I've also continued to practice and draw upon it. So in this survival kit, right, she writes in this book, in the conclusion, we need a handle when we lose it. A Killjoy survival kit is about finding a handle at the very moment one seems to lose it, when things seem to fly out of hand. A way of holding on when the possibility you are reaching for seems to be slipping away. Feminist killjoys, even when things fly out of hand, even when we fly out of hand, we need a handle on things. So item number one in the survival kit, books. You need your favorite feminist books close to you. Your famous feminist books need to be handy. You need to take them with you, make them with you. Words can pick you up when you are down. And note, it is often books that name the problem that help us handle the problem. Kick-ass feminist books have a special agency all of their own. I feel propelled by their kick. So this one is in my survival kit. The other one in my survival kit is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Murray Brown. And Adrienne Murray Brown writes quite a bit about moving at the speed of trust and learning how to attend and care for the self while you're engaged in difficult situations. So books are number one. Number two, things. A feminist life, too, is surrounded by things. Living a feminist life creates feminist things. We all have tendencies. We might be a feminist hoarder, keep every little poster, button, scrap of paper from a meeting, or we might not. But think of how a convention is a thing maker. We need to have things, too, things that gather around, reminders of a feminist life, happy objects even, reminders of connection, shared struggles, shared lives. We might have more or fewer things, but a feminist needs her things. Number three, tools. A survival kit is also a feminist toolbox. What are your feminist tools? Mine include a pen and a keyboard, a table, the things around me that allow me to keep writing to send my words out. Maybe a survival kit is also a toolbox. We need to have things to do things with. A killjoy needs more than tools. The more she is up against. Maybe she uses her computer to write a blog. A tool, a means to a killjoy end. So for me, like Ahmed, it is pen and paper. It is an occasional blog post. Mostly it's note-taking, journaling, something that I do in the morning. And you yourselves will be very familiar with the tools that you need. Number four, time. Time also means having time out. Even when you have willingly accepted the Killjoy assignment, you are more than this assignment. Take breaks, do other things with things. Time out might be required for time in. Time out from being a Killjoy is necessary for a Killjoy if she is to persist in being a Killjoy. Being a killjoy is not all that you are, and if you are too consumed by her, she can drain too much energy and will. Come back to her. She will come back to you. You will, she will. Now, I love this notion of time, and for me, time has always included taking time out to practice yoga, meditation, reading, pleasure reading stupid books, exercise, taking time out to cook, to spend time with friends. And I really encourage spending time with friends that you make outside of academia. These folks have been part of my lifeline. The people who don't care how much you have read, the people who are not interested in whether or not you've published, the people who are going to enjoy and appreciate you outside of your accomplishments. I myself have really been so blessed by having friends that I've intentionally had to make, right, outside of academics, through the yoga world, through cooking, through just doing silly things. And that part to me is really important. It's not enough for me to only have friends in academia. I need friends that I can be with that can support me in very different ways and that I can support in really different ways. Number 5 is life. There is so much in life, as we know, things that are ordinary or just out there, beautiful things to love, those things that come and go, things that are all the more valuable because they are fragile. Being a killjoy is too occupying if it takes you away from the worlds that you're in. The rise and fall of the sun, the way the trees are angled like that, the smile of a friend when you share a joke, the cold, fresh water, the feel of the sea as immersion, the familiar smells of spice cooking. In other words, get a life, right? And get a life outside of academia because it will sustain you when academia hurts you. And sometimes academia will hurt you. Number 6, permission notes. There's only so much you can do. I have in my Killjoy survival kit some permission notes to step back when it is too much. Yeah, learning how to say no allows you to really embody your yes, right? And this is what I've learned from Adrienne Murray Brown's work. Take time out. Take time out to get in, to dig a little bit deeper inside yourself internally, but also take time out, rest, enjoy yourself. You know, these are sustaining activities. Number 7, other killjoys. I think other killjoys are an essential part of my Killjoy survival kit. I know it might sound odd to put other people in a place you have designated as your space, but I cannot think of being a killjoy without the company of other killjoys. This is not about identity. It's not about assuming a community of killjoys. Rather, it is about the experience of having others who recognize the dynamics because they too have been there in that place, that difficult place. I imagine that this complaint collective is one such opportunity to be with other killjoys. They can extend a lifeline to us when we need it most. Number 8, humor. A close kin of the figure of the feminist killjoy is the figure of the humorless feminist, the one who cannot or will not get the joke, the one who is miserable. Oh, the proximity of kinship. Of course, we refuse to laugh at sexist jokes. We refuse to laugh when jokes are not funny. I consider this point to be so vital that it forms the 4th of the 10 principles of my Killjoy manifesto. But we do laugh. And feminist laughter can lighten our loads. In fact, we laugh often in recognition of the shared absurdity of this world, or just in recognition of this world here. What I am implying here, lightening our loads becomes part of a Killjoy survival strategy. When we are dealing with heavy histories, lightening becomes a shared activity. When we are dealing with norms that tighten, the more we fail to inhabit them, making it difficult to breathe, loosening becomes a shared activity. Part of the work of lightening and loosening is sharing. Because diversity work is costly, we have to share the costs of doing that work. Humor, laughter, joy, and celebration. I refuse to avoid joyfulness and celebration. Celebration to me is not only an emotion and an activity that sustains me. To me, it's also politically powerful. So, humor. Number 9, feelings. Our emotions can be a resource. We draw on them. To be a killjoy is often to be assigned as being emotional, too emotional, letting your feelings get in the way of your judgment, letting your feelings get in the way. Your feelings can be the site of a rebellion. A feminist heart beats the wrong way. Feminism is hearty. So I opened this video with sharing some of my rage and my upset that led to my complaint to my provost. But I also had tears of rage, tears of embarrassment, tears of loss, but they were incredibly valuable to feel. And in feeling and processing these feelings, they also compelled me to complain. And number 10, bodies. It is true, it is wearing. We can be worn down as well as becoming down. Bodies need to be looked after. Bodies need to be nourished and fed. So I'm going to end this by saying that yes, your bodies matter. Your body should be treated well by yourself, by the others around you. And many of us know that the traumas we've experienced are traumas that live in our bodies, the hypervigilance, the constant need to be on guard, the constant daily assaults to our well-being, right? These all leave an imprint on our bodies. And part of the survival strategy is to attend well to the body, to learn how to see that trauma is something that's embedded in our physical selves. And so learn to take care of that physical self. Learn to move. Learn to exercise your body. Get outside. Learn to trust your gut. When your gut feels off, when you sense something is wrong, something is wrong. So in addition to taking care of your body, I also want you to trust your body. Your body will often sense things that have gone awry way before your mind can wrap itself around what's happening. So trust your body and trust your gut. Your gut is, after all, your second brain. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. And I want to thank everybody who is part of this Complaints Collective. I wish you well. I wish you ease and well-being, and I'd be happy to serve here as a resource if you ever want to reach out and drop a line. Thank you.